Big tech is in the spotlight this week with major hearings in Congress about its role in Russian election meddling. But honestly, that is the least of our worries when it comes to big tech. This week, there were new allegations about the tech giants themselves meddling in our democracy. Are there overwhelmingly liberal workers applying anti-conservative, anti-Trump bias, whether in direct or even unconscious ways? It's their dominance that makes them dangerous. No one in our society should be overmighty. Not the government, not the unions, not big business, and certainly not big tech. That's why we need much more competition in the tech sector. Not just one Google and one Facebook, but 10, 20, 100. But it's not just about undermining our democracy from within. The most dangerous thing going on with big tech right now is Google's collusion with our number one enemy, China. China has a clearly stated plan for world domination by 2149, the 100th anniversary of the communist regime. It sees technology as its primary weapon, especially artificial intelligence. Last year, Google set up an artificial intelligence center in Beijing. This year, it's working with China's autocrats to build a censored search engine. At the same time, Google pulled out of artificial intelligence work with our own Defense Department. So, one of our biggest and most powerful corporations, itself established with the backing of the US taxpayer, won't work with our government to defend democracy, but is falling over itself to work with the world's worst despots to crush democracy. As I've said before, I know the word treason is thrown around too much these days, but that seems like a pretty good definition of it to me. This is what Congress should be asking Google about this week. But wait, they can't. Because Google's CEO, this man, Sundar Pichai, is refusing to appear. Well, he should be forced to appear. Not just to account for his staggering hypocrisy. Remember all that guff from Google protesting President Trump's travel ban? It was estimated this week that China has literally imprisoned 1 million Muslims in internment camps, brainwashing them to worship dictator Xi Jinping. That's okay, though, because Google just wants to get back into China so it can make more money. But disgusting though that hypocrisy is, Google's threat to our national security is far worse. Remember the Manchurian candidate? It was a fictional story about an American soldier brainwashed into becoming an assassin for a communist regime. Well, Sundar Pichai is the Manchurian CEO, an American business leader who's become a direct threat to this country by acting as the agent of a real communist regime, China, the world's worst authoritarian dictatorship, and a mortal threat to America, democracy, and freedom. President Trump needs to step in now and stop him. Tell me what you think of that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRev FNC. Back to discuss. Here's Tammy Bruce, and joining her, you see him in the morning, you hear him on the radio. He's the co-host of Fox & Friends, and he's here tonight, the author of Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans, which will be out in paperback on October the 23rd. Yes, it's Brian Kilmeade. There he is.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Hey, Tammy.
Hey, Brian.
Come on. So come on, Brian. What do you think? Google and China, you happy with that situation?
Well, I mean, number one, I'll go back to, you totally covered it, and what we really want to emphasize is the fact that Google had a contract with the Pentagon. Facing what they thought would be an insurrection from their employees, they dumped the contract because some people believed that they'd be working with some weaponry that would eventually work to kill people, so they didn't want to be part of it. So you say goodbye, red, white, and blue, and then you go into China and say, what will it take for us to get this business? So they throw all their values and ethics in the street in order to get a very big check in return. I believe that this is a huge problem. I think the president is onto something when he attacked them straight off. And I think whether it's a senior vice president or it's the CEO himself, the world's going to be watching. And as Don Jr. said yesterday, he's got 3 million. His dad's got a lot of people. What if all of a sudden all those people pulled off to another vehicle in a free market system and they no longer were part of Google, Facebook, or anything else out there? Maybe they start their own.
So that's a great point, Tammy, isn't it? I mean, I touched on it as well, which is we wouldn't worry so much about all of this if these companies weren't so dominant, if there was more competition.
Well, yes, exactly. And you've got now Google is so big, it's like the too big to fail, but it's operating like an element of government. And it's operating, as you've noted in your opening here for this segment, where a person can even just say, never mind, I'm not going to go and I'm not going to testify to Congress, because they're beyond that. Google also had a very big role with the Obama administration, actually in government. So I think that there's a sense that they can operate in a certain way with impunity. Now, at the same time, this is the irony with what Brian brought up. The Google employees didn't want Google to work with the Pentagon, but then apparently have no problem with Google then working and assisting this tyranny in China that is imprisoning people and also working to create weapons that kill people. But it's even more than the search engine issue. This first came up when it was announced that Google, because they see Apple as in China, right? So they're seeing Apple as the competitor. And so it's a search engine that they would censor. They would help facilitate the government in its ability to keep the Chinese citizenry ignorant. But it's more than that. They're also talking about using Chinese companies, which are, of course, the government companies, to manage the cloud that would be in China that Google would use, which means all the documents that would be moved through the Google cloud for China would be available to the Chinese government. And that is clearly a known dynamic. So they're willing to do that as well. And it's beyond even just the free market. This is an American company facilitating, as you've noted, and Brian notes, an enemy of this country, already with our copyright dynamics, our intellectual property being stolen. What do you think is going to happen when Google presents and offers and makes available effectively their infrastructure to the Chinese government? I think that changes this game entirely and ramps up a cyber war.
Steve, the other thing
I agree.
like
So, Brian, go on. Go ahead.
Well, the one thing, I'm looking forward to the hearings next week. I get it. But for the most part, I'm always disappointed because they're not experts. Like, you're an expert in this area. You need experts answering these questions at a high level with these tech companies.
Great point.
Because they basically laugh at the questions because they're so unsophisticated.
Right.
And I don't necessarily blame the lawmakers. This thing is evolving. The average lawmaker is 50, 60, 70 years old. They're just catching up to this, let alone trying to find out what's next. These companies know what's next. They're not going to tell us unless they're pushed. We need tech experts next to lawmakers to ask the questions to make sure we're on the right track.
Excellent point.
I agree with that. Now, Brian, one other thing I just wanted to get your take on. You touched on it earlier. You mentioned Don Jr.'s comments last week about this whole issue of big tech and its dominance. Steve Bannon also said something very interesting last week, where he was saying this whole issue is just going to get bigger and bigger. And he was saying that actually the role of big tech in society could be one of the dominant election issues by 2020. What do you make of that?
I think he's right. Steve Bannon does things wrong that I still can't understand, but other things he does. He has a lot of foresight in a lot of other areas. But I would say a couple of things are happening. When I brought up that, and I presented to you what the Trumps are thinking about and others are thinking about, 67% of conservatives believe as though these tech companies are anti-conservative. So if they believe that, they're going to get their own vehicle. Guess what they'll leave? Liberals to their own vehicle. Then we'll be on our own lanes. We'll never talk to each other about anything. Social media was once a place where we could collide, maybe too much. But soon we'll say, I have no interest in what you're saying. You're never going to be fair, so I'm not even going to try to be fair. So in a way, that would scare me a little. But conservatives feel as though the conventional feeling is that the Trumps utilize social media much better. It's part of the main reasons they won. They're still ahead when it comes to Facebook and others. So how do you stop it if you can't beat it? What you do is take that vehicle and make it very tough for them to get their message out. And it seems to be happening, but they didn't count on on President Trump speaking up about it like he is, calling them out like he is.
See, that's it. I think it's a behavior of both the system in Washington, being used to being able to operate in a certain way without being pushed back on, and the tech companies, which in fact have had the support of the Democrats and of a certain segment of government. And I think a lot of people think they're just going to wait out the Trump era. Well, this is not going to end. This is the beginning of a reformation that will be generations long. And this is our chance. What we have to do is decide how it is we're going to make this change. Not if we can do it, but decide how. And I agree with Brian. We don't want to balkanize the way we communicate in this country. And we've got to make sure that we make this dynamic fair as opposed to abandoning it and starting up something separately.
Well, it's such a central conversation. I've got a very simple solution to it, by the way, which, as you know, because we've talked about it, I just practice every day, which is I don't have a phone, I don't get involved, I just close down the technology and banish it from my life as much as possible. Anyway,
no wonder you never
I don't think that's
return
for
my
everyone.
text.
Yeah.
There you go.
And don't worry, I'll be promoting the show on Twitter for us, so we're covered.
Yeah, I guess so.
Very good. Very good. Thank you both so much.